A. Todd Blanch was terminated immediately, not after a discreet phone conversation, not following a closed-door meeting, not after extended deliberation behind polished mahogany doors. A. Immediately following the most devastating courtroom collapse of his career, Donald Trump eliminated him in real time. One federal judge systematically dismantled him before a packed gallery. One series of responses crumbled under methodical cross-examination. And within 90 minutes of the gavel striking the bench, the attorney who had stood beside Trump through every criminal proceeding, every high-risk hearing, every public defense of the indefensible was simply gone. This is not another administrative reshuffle. This is not a quiet reassignment or a graceful exit to some private sector position. This is a public execution carried out in plain view. When the most powerful figure in the country determines that loyalty carries an expiration date, the consequences arrive instantly and completely. What transpired inside that courtroom was so catastrophic that Trump's own legal team stopped defending it the moment the transcript began circulating through official channels. The atmosphere shifted from controlled tension to open disbelief within approximately 40 minutes. The White House responded with unprecedented speed. So what triggered this sudden and absolute termination? It began with a high-stakes hearing that was supposed to be routine damage control. Blanch entered federal court that morning expecting to resolve the lingering questions surrounding the collapsed anti-weaponization fund and the associated tax immunity agreement. He arrived with prepared talking points, a meticulously constructed timeline, and the quiet confidence of someone who had weathered worse storms. Instead, the judge transformed the proceeding into a forensic examination of Blanch's own previous sworn statements. This was not merely another difficult day in court. This was the moment the entire loyalty infrastructure surrounding Trump's Justice Department fractured in public view. Every prior assurance, every carefully phrased congressional response, every claim of good faith was pulled into the light and measured against the written record. I have obtained the sequence of events, the specific exchanges, the visible physical responses, the moments of silence that extended beyond normal duration, and the rapidity with which the White House acted afterward. Let me walk you through precisely how it unraveled minute by minute, because the details make this destruction so complete. Here is what the courtroom record actually shows. At 10:17 a.m., Judge Kathleen Williams posed a direct question to Blanch regarding his May 19 testimony. She did not paraphrase. She did not summarize. She recited his earlier statement verbatim that there had been no mechanism for judicial review of the settlement because there is no judge. Blanch attempted to clarify. He began with the familiar cadence of someone who had delivered the same explanation numerous times before. The judge interrupted him mid-sentence. "Mr. Blanch," she said, her voice flat and deliberate, "the court was available every single day. You chose not to use it. That is not a technicality. That is a choice." The courtroom fell completely silent. You could hear the ventilation system. You could hear someone in the gallery shift position. Then came the second blow, more devastating than the first. The judge introduced a sealed declaration from a career Dow J attorney who claimed Blanch had personally directed the team to withhold settlement details from the court until after the dismissal order was entered. Blanch denied it. He shook his head once. The judge noted without raising her voice that the declaration was sworn under penalty of perjury. This is the moment everything changed. According to multiple witnesses present, Blanch's face flushed. The color rose from his collar to his cheeks within seconds. He looked down at his notes. His co-counsel leaned in and whispered something urgent. Blanch did not respond. He kept his eyes fixed on the page in front of him as if the words might reorganize themselves into a more favorable answer. The judge continued, methodical and unhurried. The court is extremely troubled by the pattern. First, the unsworn congressional assurances. Then the public announcement of a fund that was never properly authorized. Then today's testimony that appears designed to create the appearance of compliance while avoiding actual judicial oversight. She paused. The pause extended longer than necessary. And it gets worse, she said. I am directing the clerk to transmit a certified copy of this entire hearing transcript and the related filings to the New York State Bar for immediate review of potential professional misconduct. That sentence landed like an explosion. Reporters in the overflow room later described the collective intake of breath. One longtime court observer said the temperature in the room changed. Another stated, you could feel the government side of the courtroom physically shrink. Blanch attempted one final response. He said the department had acted in good faith at every stage. The judge looked at him for several full seconds, long enough that the silence itself became the response, and replied, "Good faith is not a defense when the record shows otherwise." She then recessed the hearing for 20 minutes. When court resumed, the damage was irreversible. The judge made clear she would issue a written order detailing her findings within 48 hours. She also left open the possibility of further sanctions. A, including potential contempt proceedings if additional misrepresentations came to light. This was not a procedural setback. This was not a judge being difficult. A, this was a public finding that the acting Attorney General of the United States had given testimony the court considered misleading at best and disingenuous at worst. A, and that the matter was being referred for potential professional discipline that could end his ability to practice law. A, that is the evidence that reached the White House in real time. A, hit that subscribe button right now because this story is still developing and you will want every update as the consequences continue to land. Now you have witnessed the courtroom collapse. Here is how the ground was prepared for it, and the backstory makes the public humiliation even more complete. Tensions surrounding Blanch had been building for months, layer by layer. The anti-weaponization fund, the tax immunity side agreement that protected Trump and his family, the ethics complaints already pending in New York, and the steady stream of federal judges openly questioning DOJ representations in other cases had created a pressure cooker that was always going to explode the moment it was forced into open court under oath. Everything escalated when the formal confirmation process began. Republican senators demanded written proof the fund was dead. Career lawyers inside the department began documenting, sometimes in real time, what they viewed as pressure to prioritize political objectives over institutional norms. Some of those internal notes would later surface. Others remained sealed, but the atmosphere inside Main Justice had already turned brittle. On the morning of the hearing, Blanch entered the courtroom with the expectation that a carefully prepared set of answers would close the chapter once and for all. He had survived worse rooms. He had stood next to Trump through verdicts and sentencing hearings and hostile media scrums. This was supposed to be manageable. Instead, the judge treated the prior record as lev ammunition. Every previous statement was loaded and fired back at him. There was no room for the usual lawyerly pivots. There was no room for the familiar claims of context or evolving understanding. The record was the record, and it was being read aloud in a federal courtroom while cameras and reporters documented every second. This was not about one bad answer. It was about a pattern that had finally been forced into the open under the one condition Blanch could not control. A federal judge who decided the institutional damage had gone far enough. By the time the gavel fell, the political cost had already been calculated at the highest levels. The only question left was how quickly the White House would move. Smash that like button if this is connecting the dots for you so far. The bombshell moment came when the judge finished reading the referral language out loud. People in the gallery later said the air left the room. One reporter described Blanch's posture shifting in real time, shoulders slightly hunched, hands flat on the table, eyes fixed on a single page of notes he never turned. His breathing changed. The controlled stillness of a courtroom veteran gave way to something more brittle. A senior DOJ staffer sitting behind counsel table put both hands over his face for several seconds. Another leaned forward as if the physical distance might somehow change what had just been said. When the judge announced the bar referral, a visible wave moved through the government side of the courtroom. No one spoke. No one moved to object. No one asked for clarification. The silence was total and revealing. That was the moment the story stopped being about legal strategy and became about survival. Everyone in that room understood what a formal misconduct referral from a federal judge means for an attorney who still needs Senate confirmation, and for a president who had staked his Justice Department's credibility on that attorney's personal loyalty and courtroom performance. The political math shifted in real time. The protective circle that had surrounded Blanch for months began to dissolve while he was still seated at the counsel table. Don't go anywhere. The most consequential part is still coming. Drop a comment if you saw this breaking point coming. This is not the first time a top Justice Department official has been destroyed by a single courtroom confrontation. Think back to the final months of previous administrations when attorneys general or deputies found themselves facing judges who decided the institutional damage was no longer tolerable. The pattern is consistent and well documented. Once a federal judge puts findings of misleading statements on the record and refers the matter for professional discipline, the political protection around that official begins to evaporate. The White House may try to buy time. Allies may issue statements of continued confidence. But the underlying reality is that the institution itself can no longer absorb the cost. The key difference this time is the speed. In past cases, the process often stretched across weeks of internal debate, private negotiations, and carefully leaked trial balloons. Here, the White House moved in under 2 hours. There was no extended period of public support followed by a quiet resignation. There was no attempt to reframe the hearing as a disagreement over legal interpretation. The decision was made, the statement was issued, and the chapter was closed before the written judicial order even existed. The historical result when loyalty and courtroom credibility collide is almost always the same. A, the official is removed before the written order can inflict further institutional damage. The longer the person remains in the role after a public judicial finding of this severity, the more the damage spreads to every other case the department is handling. What made this moment unique was the personal history. A, Blanch had been Trump's defense lawyer through multiple criminal cases. He had been the public face of the legal defense when the political stakes were highest. That history made the public nature of the collapse even more costly. It was not just an acting attorney general being removed. A, it was the man who had stood in the well of the court next to the president himself, now being dismantled by another federal judge in open session. Legal observers watching the hearing called the sequence extraordinary. A former federal prosecutor who reviewed the full transcript said the judge's language was as close as a sitting district judge gets to telling the acting attorney general that his prior sworn statements cannot be reconciled with the record. The prosecutor noted that the combination of the bar referral and the explicit characterization of the testimony left almost no room for political recovery. A constitutional law professor who has studied executive branch accountability for decades noted that a formal bar referral from a federal judge against the nation's top law enforcement officer is virtually unprecedented in modern practice. You can have policy disagreements. You can have aggressive lawyering. You can even have public criticism from the bench. What you almost never see is a sitting judge directing a misconduct referral against the acting attorney general while he is still in the role. Even voices who had previously defended Blanch's aggressive approach conceded the damage. One former Trump administration lawyer speaking on background said once a judge puts misleading and disingenuous next to the acting attorney general's name in open court and sends the file to the bar, the political math changes completely. There is no speech, no statement, no amount of loyalty that can unwind that in real time. A retired appellate judge who has watched DuJoy lawyers appear before him for 30 years added that the optics alone made continued service impossible. You cannot have the head of the Justice Department operating under an active professional misconduct referral from a federal court. The judge said the institution cannot absorb that. Every subsequent appearance by any DOJ lawyer would be colored by it. Every representation of good faith would be met with skepticism. The damage becomes systemic. The consensus among the experts who spoke after the hearing was that the courtroom performance had crossed a line no amount of political loyalty could repair. The combination of the public findings, the bar referral, and the personal history between Blanch and the president created a perfect storm that ended the only way it could. If this analysis is valuable to you, slam that like button. It helps more people see what's actually happening. So, what does this actually mean going forward? First, the immediate consequence is a sudden vacuum at the top of the Justice Department. An acting attorney general fired in the middle of a confirmation process leaves every pending high-profile matter in temporary limbo. Career officials will now operate under heightened caution. Political appointees will wait to see who replaces him and what signal that replacement sends about the new boundaries of acceptable risk. Cases that were already on thin ice with the courts will face even more scrutiny. Settlement discussions that depended on the previous leadership's credibility will need to be rebuilt from scratch. Second, the short-term political impact lands hardest on the White House. Trump had publicly tied his own credibility to Blanch's performance. He had defended him through earlier controversies. He had signaled that Blanch was the permanent choice. The public nature of the courtroom collapse and the speed of the firing create an unavoidable narrative. Even the closest personal loyalists are disposable once they become institutional liabilities. That narrative will be used by critics, by rivals inside the administration, and by senators who will now approach any future nominee with a different set of questions. Third, the longer-term implications reach the entire relationship between the executive branch and the federal judiciary. When a federal judge can force the removal of the acting attorney general through findings made in open court, every future DOJ appearance carries higher stakes. Lawyers will be more careful about what they put on the record. Judges will be more willing to put critical language into their orders when they believe the department is playing games with the truth. The balance of power shifts, at least temporarily, toward the courts. That shift may be healthy for the rule of law. It may also make the department more cautious, more risk-averse, and less willing to take aggressive positions that the White House once pursued. The broader effect on the rule of law debate is significant. Supporters of the administration will frame the firing as decisive leadership, proof that Trump will not tolerate failure even from his closest allies. Critics will frame it as proof that the department had already lost the confidence of the judiciary and that the removal was simply the final acknowledgement of a deeper institutional crisis. Both interpretations will harden existing divides. The middle ground will shrink. For the audience that has followed every twist of the fund controversy, the ethics complaints, and the confirmation fight, the message is clear. Courtroom credibility still carries real consequences, even at the highest levels. Loyalty can protect you through political storms. It cannot protect you when a federal judge decides the record itself has become the problem. And then Trump made the decision irreversible. Within 90 minutes of the hearing's end, a short statement went out from the White House. It was sparse by design. The president had lost confidence in the acting attorney general and had directed that he be removed effective immediately. There was no lengthy explanation. There was no soft landing language about future service or gratitude for past contributions, just the termination. Blanch's team did not issue an immediate, detailed response. A single line from a spokesperson said he had served with integrity and would have no further comment while the bar review proceeded. That was all. No defense of the testimony, no claim of mischaracterization, no suggestion that the judge had overreached. The silence itself became part of the story. The speed of the firing itself became the central fact. By choosing to end Blanch before the written judicial order could even be filed, Trump signaled that the political cost of waiting was higher than the cost of acting. Every additional hour Blanch remained in the role would have invited more questions, more leaks, more comparisons to the courtroom transcript. The White House chose the clean break. That choice now defines the final chapter of Blanch's tenure. Not a quiet resignation after private negotiations, not a negotiated exit with carefully crafted language about returning to private practice, but a public termination triggered by a single afternoon in federal court. The man who had once been indispensable became expendable in the time it took a judge to finish reading a referral order. But beyond the personnel change, this is really about something larger. This is about whether institutional credibility still has a price. When the person who sits at the top of the Justice Department is publicly found by a federal judge to have given misleading testimony and is then removed by the president who appointed him, the system is sending a signal. It is telling every future official that courtroom statements are not merely political talking points that can be walked back later. They are permanent record. And when that record collapses under judicial scrutiny, even the closest personal loyalty can be severed in a single afternoon. That signal reaches far beyond one man and one hearing. It reaches every lawyer who walks into federal court representing the United States. It reaches every political appointee who believes their relationship with the president will protect them from the consequences of a broken record. It reaches the judges who must decide whether to take the department's reputations at face value. The system just demonstrated that there is still a point at which the institutional cost becomes higher than the political benefit of keeping someone in place. That demonstration will be remembered the next time a similar pressure builds. Subscribe right now if you want continued coverage as the next chapter of this story unfolds. This is far from over. Here is where things stand right now. Blanch has been removed. An interim official has been designated to run the department on a temporary basis while the White House begins the search for a permanent replacement. The formal bar referral is proceeding on its own track independent of the political decision. The written judicial order is expected within days and will almost certainly expand on the findings already made in open court, adding detail and permanence to the public record. Senate confirmation of any permanent replacement will now occur under the shadow of this episode. Every future nominee will face questions about how they would handle similar judicial confrontations. How they would respond if a judge characterized their testimony the way Blanch was characterized. And whether they understand that loyalty to the president does not override the duty of candor to the court. The White House has made clear it will not revisit the decision. There will be no second chance, no reconsideration, no attempt to reframe the hearing as a misunderstanding. The focus has already shifted to selecting the next attorney general and controlling the narrative around the speed of the firing. What happens in the next 72 hours? The content of the written order, the first statements from career DOJ lawyers who watched the hearing, the political reaction on both sides of the aisle, and the names that begin to surface as possible replacements will determine how long this story continues to dominate the news cycle. The institutional aftershocks will last longer. The stakes were absolute. The evidence from the courtroom was public and damning. Trump chose to end Blanch on the spot rather than absorb another day of institutional damage. What happens next will shape the Justice Department for the remainder of the term. This was never just another staffing change. This was a demonstration that even the closest allies can be removed the moment a federal judge decides their credibility has collapsed in open court. Hit subscribe and the notification bell. I will be here covering every development as this continues to unfold.